Up next, our second Tech Talk of the Exchange. Please welcome Rob McHenry, Deputy Director of DARPA, for a talk on delivering advanced defense research.
So I'm glad to be able to come here and talk to you a little bit about DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. So many of you probably have heard of DARPA and know a little bit about it, but I want to talk to you about kind of what DARPA looks like today, what sets us apart from the rest of the Department of Defense research and development infrastructure, and how we're delivering real impact to benefit the national security of the United States. So there are a few things that set DARPA apart. And the first is the requirements word. If you've ever done any work with the Department of Defense, you're very familiar with the word requirements. Requirements flow down from the defense, the National Defense Strategy and the Defense Planning Guidance, and are decomposed into every acquisition office and every program of record that the department procures. And so every organization within the department is all about delivering or operating against this set of requirements for the Department of Defense, except for DARPA. DARPA's mission is to be independent of that requirements process and to be developing new capabilities that are beyond the state of the art, that don't exist today, so it couldn't possibly be written into any requirement. And so that gives us the independence and the flexibility to push beyond the state of the art in ways that the parts of the department that have to deliver those requirements can't do. And that's not to say that we're like magically better than they are. DARPA could not exist without the rest of the department doing the really important, critical day-to-day work, more evolutionary work to deliver those requirements. But that foundation gives us the freedom to take these giant leaps forward. Which leads us to the second big differentiator for DARPA, which is disruption. So people often talk about DARPA being very risk tolerant. And that's actually a pet peeve of mine, because DARPA isn't risk tolerant, we actually demand risk. And so this is a very simple framing of kind of how we think about disruption in our research activities. Imagine that there is a frontier of the possible, this unknowable boundary between what the state of the art can enable today and what we cannot do yet. And that frontier is across all the different technology areas that DARPA works in that underpin our national security. And so a great DARPA program, a high impact success, is a program that takes something that the world perceives as impossible, is above that line, and pulls it across that line and shows that we can do it today. That is a great DARPA disruption. But the only way you can know where that frontier of the possible lies is to regularly step beyond it, to try things that end up being impossible, things that are so audaciously beyond the state of the art that we fail to deliver those. And so, in the DARPA context, if we had a year where every single one of our technology programs was 100% successful and met all of its objectives and delivered technology, we wouldn't celebrate that year. We will have fundamentally failed in our mission to chart this frontier of the possible. If we're not regularly failing, then we are not doing our mission. The third differentiator for DARPA is impact. We don't do research for research's sake. While we work across the spectrum from basic science, early stage research, all the way to classified operational capability that we deliver into the hands of the warfighter and the combatant commanders, every DARPA program has an explicit impact objective, a thesis for how that program is going to change the world in some way that benefits the security of the United States. And so within the agency, we've developed a taxonomy that we refer to as master, hack, and disrupt, about different ways that we go deliver that impact and complete our mission to bring these technologies to the world. So I'll start with master. So master refers to playing the rough and tumble game of transitioning through traditional programs of record. And so through DARPA's history, we've, some of our greatest highlights, our biggest impacts, the things that have provided the technological offsets for national security advantage and technologies that have changed our society have come through these programs of record. But this is a hard-fought process. We tend to take a strategy of kind of a bottom-up and top-down approach. So the bottom-up approach means at the working level, integrating with those uniformed officers who are writing the requirements for the future military capabilities, educating them, embedding them into the DARPA work, and exposing them to what the future might bring, what these things that are across that line of the possible that are tantalizingly close could be pulled in and written into that requirements process. And that's great. That sets a foundation at the working level to kind of seed the field with the right conditions to allow DARPA programs to transition as programs of record. But the top-down approach is equally as important. We found over history that despite all the legwork that you put in, all that investment of time and energy, when it comes down to a military service, making that hard pivot from the state of the art they live in today to that new DARPA future, it almost always takes very senior leadership to push that down from the top. And so, DARPA is continuously engaging with the secretary and the service chief of staff level to educate them and expose them and show them the potential for these opportunities around these pivots to new technological vectors that are advantage for U.S. national security in the long run. So I was going to walk you through some examples of some of the master activities that have gone on historically and are going on today within DARPA. The first one is a story I know really well. This is a long-range anti-ship missile, or the AGM-158 Charlie. This is a program that I started when I was at DARPA years ago, back in 2009. So the long-range anti-ship missile was a very disruptive technology at the time. It was the first autonomous weapon system that could close the kill chain without an operator in the loop. And so there were, back in that time, in the late 2000s, that was right at the edge of the technological frontier. It was also right at the edge of the policy frontier. I spent as much time in the Pentagon, pushing policy disruption as I did pushing technology disruption for this program. This program was started as a direct request from the Indo-PACOM commander at the time, Admiral Willard. And it's what we refer to in DARPA sometimes as an operational gap filler. So DARPA moving fast and flexible, using all the freedom and flexibility we have that's different than most of the entities within the Department of Defense, and not as much on the tech disruption side. Still some really challenging problems here, but we dialed down the tech risk a little bit to increase the speed and the assurance of actually delivering a solution into the Indo-Pacific Command. And the specific problem we were trying to solve is that the Chinese had sort of systematically broken down the links that we needed to consummate kill chains through the traditional rules of engagement process that existed at the time. They also had longer range anti-ship missiles than we did. They simply could outstick us. And so Indo-PACOM asked DARPA to come in and do something quick to solve that problem and level the playing field for our naval surface forces in theater. And so we executed that program, and I remember this day very clearly, sitting in the Pentagon with my Air Force and Navy partners who were trying to plan to receive this technology from DARPA and deploy it operationally into the services. And they presented their very aggressive 15-year timeline to take the results of the DARPA program and achieve IOC, initial operating capability. And they were so proud that they had gotten it down from 20 plus years to 15 years. And so, that wasn't good enough. And so DARPA, with that top-down approach, we played that top-down card, and with the most senior leadership in the Department of Defense, we're able to get exceptions to the DoD acquisition process and fast-track those processes so that we could eventually, and at one point even ran the LRASM delivery office, stood up the acquisition office in the DARPA building with our Air Force and Navy partners to kind of try to accelerate this process. With all of that effort, we moved the IOC of LRASM to 2018, which was merely 9 years after we started the program. So a great success relative to the 20-plus year business as usual, the 15-year aggressive service approach, but 9 years still doesn't seem good enough. So it's a great success. This is a cornerstone capability in our naval forces today, in our Air Force today, but it's slower than it needs to be. There are similar stories in program of record transition around next generation air platforms for the Air Force. On the left is a picture of an old program called Have Blue. This was the first stealth aircraft that was developed. And I include this in here even though it's an old story because it's so quintessentially DARPA. So at that time, the Air Force's model for penetrating air defenses was to fly low and fast, supersonic and what they called nap of the earth, 100 feet off the deck, following the terrain so you can fly under the radar and get in and strike your target. And so some smart DARPA program manager proposed, hey, I think I can build a different kind of aircraft that will just fly kind of slow and fat, right in the mid-altitudes where the anti-air missiles are designed to go get you. Doesn't that sound like a great idea, Air Force? And they, perhaps understandably, kind of laughed the guy out of the room and said, that makes no sense. And it threatened the current force structure. The Air Force was investing heavily in the B-1 bomber then, the state-of-the-art, low-penetrating strategic bomber. And so DARPA, given our flexibility, our freedom from requirements, we said, noted, and we did the program anyway. We developed the aircraft, we built the aircraft, we flew the aircraft around the Air Force test ranges without their prior knowledge. And then we took that data package to the Air Force leadership and said, did you know we did this? And that it was a bit of a stunt, but it opened their eyes to the potential of this new technology and created the stealth offset, which has been a US advantage for the subsequent decades. DARPA's done a series of these kind of X-plane development programs, and the latest one that we're proud to be able to tell our story about now is the work that went into the F-47. So with the recent announcement of a program of record for the F-47, it also was disclosed that this is something that DARPA started back in 2013 in a program called the Air Dominance Initiative. That Air Dominance Initiative created what's referred to as NGAD, the Next Generation Air Defense System, the family of air platforms that the Air Force is currently investing in. And DARPA built and flew 2 X-planes with the enabling technology, the first one flying in 2019 to enable what has been announced as the acquisition of F-47. So again, we're 12 years from DARPA starting the initial studies to the acquisition decision to go procure a new program. But it's that sort of tenacious legwork, mastering that process of partnering with the Air Force closely throughout that finally gets us over that edge and creates that program of record transition. We're at 12 years and now counting until we actually IOC this aircraft. So still, painfully long timelines. Similar stories in the Navy. One of the other programs I started as a program manager was this ship on the left. It was called ACTIVE. It's an acronym for ASW, Continuous Trail Unmanned Vessel. DARPA likes tortured acronyms. So the context of the day was that the biggest unmanned ship, uncrewed ship that the Navy could conceive of was an 11-meter boat. And the reason it could be an 11-meter boat was because that was the biggest thing that a real ship could launch over the side with davits. So their whole conceptualization of what an uncrewed vessel was a small adjunct that supported the mission of a real ship. And so DARPA did the ACTIVE program to change that paradigm, to demonstrate that we could have a large ship that could leave the pier in San Diego, transit across the Pacific, go do a mission that's months long, and return home. And DARPA was successful in doing that. The technologies, the ACTIVE became Sea Hunter. The Navy procured more. That autonomy stack went into the Ghost fleet. It kind of got to a point where at one point the Navy was talking about 50% of their force structure being uncrewed vessels. Maybe a little ahead of the technology, actually, beyond what DARPA had demonstrated at the time. And so over the subsequent years, a follow-on program manager realized that there was still an unsolved problem that kept this disruption from being fully unleashed. And that is the dirty little secret today that of all the uncrewed vessels that the Navy has experimented with, none of them have gone more than a few days without a human having to step on board and fix something. To reset a breaker or change a filter, do something to keep that ship operating. The ocean is this extremely harsh environment, and ships have been designed for centuries to have, millennia, to have crews on board to go do these things and keep these systems, complex systems working. And so DARPA has a program today called NOMARS, a no mariner required ship, with the goal of being able to stay underway for 12 months continuously with zero human interaction. So we're trying to solve definitively that problem of the reliability and sustainability of these vessels. NOMARS also has some really interesting characteristics in changing the way we think about building ships in sort of a modular factory approach, maintaining ships where this vessel can pull into any fishing port around the world that has a standard 3-ton crane, pull out an engine module, put a new one in, and the ship goes back out to sea while the module goes back to the factory for refurbishment. So it's designed to be scalable and manufacturable and operable in a very different model that we're very excited about. So NOMARS is at sea today. It's in its final integration stage, and we expect to take it into sea trials later this summer. So this is another example of a decade-long engagement with a service partner to set the foundations for a program of record transition that disrupts what the services do today. An example of an active mastering the transition process is something called resilient software systems. So we've all been mollified into accepting this world where we write code that has vulnerabilities, bad guys exploit that code, then after the exploitation we patch it, and we go around this merry-go-round again and again and again, spending billions of dollars a year. What resilient software systems is trying to scale a body of work known as formal methods. So more than a decade ago, DARPA showed that through formal methods, you can basically create a mathematical representation of code. And then you can run formal mathematical proofs that the code cannot be made to enter any state outside of its design condition. So proper caveats, it's impossible to prove the negative that it's unhackable code, but to the definition of the mathematical model, you can prove that it is unhackable. And it still leaves vulnerabilities at the squishy human layer on top and some hardware vulnerabilities at the bottom. But this technology stack literally removes all of the dominant vectors of cyber insecurity that we all struggle with on a day-to-day basis. And we have the platform now to eliminate that. And so over the years of DARPA work in this area, we have successfully transitioned parts of this stack to 23 different DoD systems. And so, yay us. The program managers over years were super excited about those successes, but we took a step back and said, have we fundamentally moved the needle in national security relative to the cybersecurity of our systems? And the answer is clearly no. And so what the Resilient Software Systems program or initiative is focused on now is to scale this across the Department of Defense and then hopefully our broader society as rapidly as we can. And so to do that, to master that transition through not just one program of record or 23 programs of record, but all of the programs of record, we're executing a strategy built on these capstone demonstrations, where we partnered with the Undersecretary of Defense for R&E, Research and Engineering, and A&S, Acquisition Sustainment, as well as each of the acquisition executives in the services, to identify a key frontline warfighting system and do a formal methods deployment on that system in a highly instrumented way that will give us technical proof of the security benefits. It'll give us cost information about how much it costs to actually implement these things, as well as best practices to do it. And it is also starting to start the flywheel, that chicken and egg problem, where we have technical performers that can do this work, but not a market that's asking them to scale it enough, and yet they can't scale it enough. The defense industrial base can't deploy it without performers who can go deploy the technology with them. And so we're trying to jumpstart that whole ecosystem through these capstone projects. There is also a Resilient Software Systems Colloquium that DARPA is hosting in just a couple of weeks here in Washington, D.C., where we're trying to share the best practices and information about this technology stack with the broader community. There are over 300 programs at DARPA. This was actually a notes page from me putting this brief together, and I asked them to leave it in there, because this is basically just a list of other AI-related programs that go from high-assurance AI, embodied AI and autonomous systems, AI and strategic planning and wargaming, as well as hardware enablers for AI at the edge. So DARPA has a portfolio that covers all these things. I'd love to talk to you about each one of them. There's some really cool programs in here, many of which will transition to that mastery of programs of record. All right, so that's master. Hack. So when you bring a bunch of DARPA program managers, renegades who we select for their spirit of maybe fighting against the system and being frustrated by the kinds of timelines that I just walked through, even when we're successful in mastering the current system. And when you bring those program managers out, DARPA program manager has virtually unlimited access to information, virtually unlimited access to resources. They have complete intellectual freedom to pick the problems that will provide those offsets to national security. The only thing they're limited on is time. Right? A DARPA program manager is only in the building for an average of 4 years, and then we literally fire them and we hire the next generation, because that's that constant turnover and fresh perspective that drives the agency. So when you tell someone, go change the world, you have all the resources you need, but do it fast, and then you say, oh yeah, even when we're wildly successful, it's still on the order of a decade to go through a program of record, they understandably get a little frustrated with that. And because they're renegades, they start hacking around the system in all kinds of beautiful, creative ways. And so I want to give you some examples of what DARPA hacking for impact looks like. There are a number of activities that DARPA has been emphasizing in recent years on doing our demonstrations forward with our warfighting partners in the theater in ways that we haven't before. It used to be, DARPA would go do a demonstration on some test range, we'd collect all the data, we'd put it on a PowerPoint slide, and then we'd fly around the world showing it to everyone, trying to get everyone excited about our cool technology. It's a much better story when Marines in 3MEF are out handling our systems off the Okinawa to demonstrate what is possible. And it generates it makes us raise our game a little bit because we have to make these things really work in warfighters' hands. It generates a groundswell of support and excitement around the technologies, and often it leaves silver bullets in theater that are initial capabilities that those combatant commanders could use in a time of need. Most of these examples are classified, but this model is working really well. This is where DARPA is delivering warfighting capability day in and day out to our warfighters around the world. An example of a program that was sort of designed from the beginning for, actually, a punchline on this one that I skipped. What you're seeing there is a glider that does submarine communications. And the way that DARPA eventually delivered this impact was by delivering it as a service. So we were fully successful in achieving a Navy program of record to go deliver this capability, but it was going to be, you guessed it, 10 years out before they actually delivered the capability. And SubPac said, I need that now. And so we were able to bring together the constellation of private capital, a services company to go maintain and operate it around the world, and the tech developer that DARPA had originally funded in a model to bring all that together and enable operations today as a service where that combatant commander can use their operations money while the Navy eventually stands up the acquisition program to go procure the capability. So that as-a-service model is something that we've experimented with in other ways. This is the Space Watch program, which is trying to solve the problem of space situational awareness, where we've gone from some 400 satellites in orbit to a future in the not-too-distant future where we'll have 40,000 satellites in orbit. How do we know what's up there and keep track of it all? This expansion breaks most of the models that we relied on in history. So what Space Watch does is uses star trackers. So every satellite in orbit has what's called a star tracker. It looks out at the stars and matches the pattern and uses that to orient the satellite. It's a commodity thing, no advanced technology there. Every single satellite has one. What the DARPA program manager realized is that those star trackers looking out from low Earth orbit, we're seeing these streaks, this noise, this distraction to trying to see and track the stars. What those streaks were all the other satellites in orbit. And so the Space Watch program architected a model where commercial satellite operators can sell those tracks into a marketplace. And if they are seeing something that we know is there and everyone sees every day, it's not worth very much. If they see something that we didn't know about, it's worth a lot. And so the program from the beginning has been hacking around the acquisition process to deliver that kind of capability instead of building billion-dollar telescopes to go try to see everything on orbit, using what's up there in a really creative and cost-effective way. Another example is the AI Cyber Challenge. So this program is all about scaling critical infrastructure defense using AI. So DARPA partnered with Anthropic, OpenAI, Google, Microsoft to be able to scale, find and fix fully autonomously vulnerabilities in our critical infrastructure. And so we did that. The way we're having the impact delivering that is by doing it in a high-profile public event. The finals are going to be in Las Vegas at DEF CON this August. By open sourcing the cyber reasoning systems that demonstrate the best capability to go do this, and by partnering with private capital providers to be ready to scale these companies and deploy this broadly across all the critical infrastructure of the United States. This is a teaser for the next program that's going to continue that impact around how we transition to these large AI companies. They're spending many billions of dollars more than DARPA has, so how do we influence them? AICC is one example of that, and AI Forge is a program we just approved a couple of weeks ago, which will be the next iteration of that. I'm going to skip ahead here to get to the final one about, actually, I'm going to go back and hit this one real quick. So one of the things about DARPA is it's not just about tech disruption, it's also about contracting disruption. And so ARIS is a DARPA contracting officer disruption. And what it is, it's an attempt to dramatically accelerate the ability for new entrants who haven't worked with DARPA or the DoD to come do research work with us. And so ARIS is a contracting marketplace. You propose by putting together a 7-minute video, and if that 7-minute video is evaluated, and if you're deemed to have credible capabilities for DARPA, the Department of Defense, you are now a selectable company within this marketplace. Anyone within the government can go pick that company, go to alpha negotiations to define a specific scope of work, and we're seeing contract awards within days at the start of that process. And most importantly of all, 63% of those current participants have never worked with DARPA before. So it's having that effect of bringing new entrants into the community. All right, so master, hack, and finally disrupt. So we all know that the current system of fixed 2-year budgets and fixed requirements and decade-long acquisition, this is not the system that's going to allow us to compete and win in the future. But it seems so intractable, so impossible to go fix that, that people have struggled even coming up with how to approach that problem. Fortunately at DARPA, something being impossible is like throwing red meat to a lion. So President Eisenhower warned back in the 50s about the risks of the perverse incentives in the defense industrial complex. And so DARPA has launched an initiative called Ike's Reckoning. And this program is looking at fundamentally questioning, coming up with a clean sheet model for how we should have the relationship between the government and our economy to be able to develop and deliver capabilities at speed and scale necessary that we can afford to sustain in peacetime and scale to a full mobilization if we needed to in wartime. So just in this example of the kind of thing we're talking about, one of the yardsticks by which we're measuring different models and capabilities is what would it take for the United States from a standing start today to be able to build 10,000 long-range munitions and 1,000 platforms, sea, air, and ground to shoot them from within 90 days, and then repeat that indefinitely through a prolonged conflict. So it will require a completely different model of how we understand the economic capabilities of the United States. And instead of the traditional model of working from warfighting concepts to determine the kit, the hardware that we need, and then as an afterthought, what capacity does the industry have to build it, which leads you to specialized defense industrial-based performers. We're looking at this problem flowing the other way. What can the United States build efficiently at scale? What does that kit look like? And then how do we develop the strategies and the concepts of how to go fight and win the war with what we have? So instead of 100 exquisite weapons, what if you could have 10,000 weapons that maybe didn't look like what you imagined they would, but have the scale to go allow you to fight and win in a protracted conflict? I wanted to just, there are a lot of people at DARPA at the event during the week. We have a booth at 1136 where you can go ask questions, follow up on any of these programs that I mentioned. We have several speakers that are speaking during the day on June 4th, as well as Rob Strayer from the Critical Minerals Forum, which is part of a DARPA program on economics for critical minerals speaking. So please go engage and ask questions. These are the people who are doing the real work. And so we're proud of our not only our long heritage at DARPA of disrupting the technological frontier, pushing the state of the art, bringing new technologies that have fundamentally changed the world. But today, we're firing on all cylinders. We have a great set of program managers, a great set of leadership, and we are working hand in glove with our service partners where necessary to master that transition process. We are creatively hacking around it to use all the tools of private capital and the economy to go deliver capabilities faster. And we're looking at fundamentally different models of how we disrupt the system altogether. Thank you.